John and Dave discuss episodes 4, 5, and 6 of Ted Lasso Season 3 and how they apply to teaching and learning. We try to use our Teaching Like Ted Lasso themes like play, curiosity, teamwork, vulnerability, discourse, and social and emotional learning, to frame the conversation. Welcome, I'm Dave.
I'm John.
And this is Teaching Like Ted Lasso. This is your one and only warning that there are spoilers ahead.
So I'm wearing the shirt you gave me. So listeners at home, I've got a shirt that is the Diamond Dog in the Peanut style, but they are all in it together. This is certainly not what the first part of this season has felt like. It feels like they're very sort of disconnected. And I think that that's some of what people are uncomfortable with. And yet, you know what this reminded me of? The Deathly Hallows, where there's that part of that book where it just feels like Harry and Hermione and Ron are just jumping around and not making any progress, and feeling like this was just sort of the worst storytelling, until I kind of stepped back and thought of the meta part of it, which was, no, this is great storytelling because it's making me feel as anxious and like I'm not making progress as the characters are. And I wonder to what extent that's sort of a vehicle that we're looking at here too.
I wonder, right? Because I thought that part of the Deathly Hallows was really kind of a tip of the hat to the Lord of the Rings,
Oh yeah.
like Sam and Frodo crossing the marshes. Which,
Yeah.
as a kid, the first two times I tried reading Return of the King, I failed in the marshes. I gave up. And then when I finally, got myself to get through it, it was like there was such catharsis.
This idea of it doesn't feel like we're making any progress, right, in the story, can also be kind of what feels like happens in our classrooms. It doesn't feel like we're making any progress, and therefore we immediately, as teachers, can jump in to try to fix things.
Kind of looking for progress, even if you don't get to the end, right? Are you seeing any progress? You can do a lot of good work before you see any progress.
Yes.
So shall we go through the episodes 4, 5, and 6 by our themes?
Yeah. So when I think about our first theme, play, there are two ideas that I see in episodes 4, 5, and 6. One is this idea of, and I don't know that we talked about it in the episode that we did for play, but it's this idea that play is a way of inviting people in. So I think about in episode 4, where the Diamond Dogs are riding back together again, and Roy leaves, but they do their best to try to get him back in, right? They're being very playful. In episode 5, they have some of the same dynamics when they're trying to get Trent Krim to actually share. He's got this idea of maybe what to do against Man City, but he says he can't, right? Because he needs to be objective. And they both, all three of them, use this analogy of a wounded monkey and the documenter who just sits and watches it as it gets attacked by the hyena, right? And it opens space, right? That playful nature opens space, I think, to allow him to actually share. Again, back to our earlier conversation, it doesn't really make any progress, but at least it sort of invites him in to be a part of the conversation.
And I was thinking, you talking about that reminds me, in episode 4, like Shandy is constantly inviting play, right? But the purposes of the play are not healthy, right? So I mean, I like about the show in general that there's like no simple solutions ever, right? Something that works in one context is not going to work in another context. And so they show that somebody who seems like it would be right in the ethic of the show, right? So, who's unconventional and thinking about doing things different ways, and and she's hardcore about play, but there's something not playful about her play. Like it has to be her way.
Shandy feels very much about ego.
Well, and in part because she's been judged for, who she is based on how she looks and what her role's been.
Yeah, and that's fair too, right? I mean, we know a little bit about Nate's background, but we don't know so much about Shandy's background.
Yeah.
So that seems to get us into trying to be curious, right? Being curious about these folks. So what are some other examples of curiosity that you saw in these last 3 episodes?
The one that kind of really stood out to me is when Hickman comes in and sits to have a very serious conversation with Rebecca about, is changing the coach on the table. To me, he's really sounding her out as to, well, what teams would usually do in this situation. Is that something we're even willing to consider? And
Right.
he doesn't come across and say we should do this. He doesn't come across and say give reasons to do this. He starts by trying to see where she is.
Yeah, that's a good point. In fact, Rebecca replies, "You want to fire Ted?" And he says something to the effect of, "What in all of this makes you think that I want to do that?" Right? And so he's not like trying to make a point. He really is genuinely curious about what to do to turn the ship around.
What strikes you about curiosity from these episodes?
One of the ones that, and it was just a really small piece, but it made me think about the episode we did with Mandy on curiosity, was this idea of Nate finds out that the supermodel wants him to call. He has the supermodel's phone number. He makes a call and asks the supermodel out, but we find out that it's not the supermodel, it's his mom. And that he's testing something out. He's wondering about it and he's getting some feedback. She gives him notes, right? And that really made me think about this idea of rough draft thinking, right? Rough draft math. That reminded me of sort of being curious about an approach and seeking some feedback.
Yeah. I mean, I love the connection with rough draft math. I hadn't thought about it as being curious, but that idea of kind of trying it out first, that does make sense.
Yeah, and so the question right with Nate was how was that? And the same thing could be said around rough draft math, was how was that?
Yeah, that's good. Nate should do more of that.
Well, he said earlier on, right, that he does that kind of a regular basis in his own head, that he's forever trying out ideas and then holds them until they're ready. But yeah, it would be he needs to get out of his head.
I mean, I saw some really hopeful signs from him in episode 5 that he is starting to figure out some of what he wants to do. I know this is skipping ahead a couple themes, but
That's okay.
he definitely shows some vulnerability. He's willing to go talk to Ted and he wants to apologize. And despite him getting all this counsel not to, his heart, I think, is leading him in a certain direction.
So where does that come into play in our classroom?
I mean, both of us, I think, are pretty honest. Whereas with our students, so like this week I've been sick and it's been very hard for me to get just get everything done that I want to get done. And so, I've got to be honest with my students about, well, you don't have feedback on this yet. And, so here's what I'm going to do in exchange to try to make that better. I want them to know that, I expect better of myself, but sometimes you can't get done everything you want to get done.
What's nice about that, John, is it's modeling for our students taking care of themselves and being honest with students about the teacher taking care of themselves and finding ways of navigating around what we often think about as being, here's what I need to do, right? We all know, you were talking about, we all know timely feedback is great. But timely feedback when I am dosed out on NyQuil might not be the best thing, right? The best thing might be for me to take care of myself. And so I need to model that as well.
All right. So I derailed us.
That's
Maybe
okay.
you're very accepting of that. One might even say it's good teamwork.
I appreciate that. You mentioned it earlier when you were talking about Shandy. It's pretty clear to me in these 3 episodes that teamwork is lacking. It's lacking at the PR firm, right? It's lacking on AFC Richmond. They are not on the same page. They are going in all different directions. And they make that very clear a couple of times. They make it clear where they are planning to play West Ham, and they start throwing each other under the bus. Ted says about you're pointing more fingers than Ganesh.
Yeah.
And so they're all going in different directions. The next one, they literally are pointing in different directions when it comes to, which way is north. They are not on the same page.
And this last episode 6, really has me thinking about, I mean, there's individual characters on the team, but I think the team is a character in its own. The team as a whole doesn't have that kind of unity. So but then thinking about, like, even teamwork within ourselves, right? Are we on the same page with all the things that we're trying to do?
Right.
I mean, as a teacher, considering the expectations we have laid on us from elsewhere, they literally pull us in different directions.
Right.
So how can we resolve that within ourselves as well as within our community?
Yeah, that's a great question. And it reminds me, Dan Anderson brought this up in our episode on teamwork, right? Where you asked him some pretty good questions, because he's a coach, about sort of the relationship between coaching and teaching. And that was one of the places where he mentioned originally, like, well, it's in coaching, the team ought to be all on the same page doing, to do this to be successful. But that might not be the same in my math class. But I don't think we spend enough time thinking about it in that way. One of the things that I've been doing with my students as they're thinking about planning lessons is using Simon Sinek's why. What's your why? And so getting them to be very intentional about what's your why, and trying to avoid a why that's a what. I want them to be able to create tree diagrams to count outcomes. That's a what. But why? Why should we be doing that? If we can have a common why, now we're all sort of on the page. And it's clear that AFC Richmond has not found a common why.
It's interesting that I have not been successful with getting my elementary pre-service teachers to adopt that why. I tried to make it a part of their daily, they work with kids every day, and so as a part of their thing. But I also understand that where they are, right, this is their first kind of recurring teaching relationship with kids, that the what is what they're concentrating on right now. They have to get straight what they're doing before they kind of lean into that. So what is the reason I'm doing this? The other thing you were saying really got me, but kind of recalling what Dan was saying, got me thinking about that class as a whole. And I have a group of seniors and a capstone this semester, and they really formed into a cohesive unit, right? So when we're having a discussion, they're checking to make sure everybody who wanted to say something gets to say it. And if somebody says something and then kind of forgets to follow up on it, somebody else will say, oh, hey, but remember we were going to do this next. And it's just been delightful, right? So when that class becomes the team, it's astounding what they can do together.
It's rewarding to be able to see that, be able to step back and see them working together. So if they're not acting like a team, I think it's really interesting that, to me, the place where, again, it feels like they're turning this all around is Ted alone coming to this realization about triangles and how that might apply.
Just a moment of appreciation for Donald Duck in Math Magic Land, one of my favorite pieces of media of all time, showing up in my current favorite show.
Yeah, it was just a meaningful bit right there in a lot of different ways. It connected with my math, it connected with my coaching. There was a lot of good stuff there. What it forced me to realize, though, or at least remember, is that sometimes teamwork, in order for a team to be successful, we all have to maybe do some of our individual work to be prepared. You see Jamie and Roy, or Jamie in particular, but Jamie and Roy doing that, doing the individual work to improve the team. And Ted, who has been very much sort of the person who's trying to inspire, who still doesn't know what a friendly is after coaching for 2.5 years
In the
in Europe.
Premier League.
So they start with good luck charms, right? This sign is gonna be what turns it around for us. That's not going to be enough for success. Then it's inspirational speeches. He gives a great speech at the end of the 5th episode when the sign is about believing in each other and stuff. It doesn't make a bit of difference in Amsterdam. You've got to be able to put that into proven practice. So many of our guests have talked about the building thinking classroom. We can be as inspirational. We can believe in the power of problem solving in mathematics. If we don't have proven protocols in place, there's a good chance that none of that's going to make any difference. I think about Stigler and Hebert and the work that they did with the teaching gap, and where they would go searching for American teachers who were saying the right things about the kind of teachers they wanted to be. And they thought they were going to see these reform-based lessons, but the walk didn't match the talk.
Right.
I think it's important, and I have to keep reminding myself and my students of this, that you've got to do some of this work individually to be prepared to be part of a team. Okay, so I've said a lot now. I'm going to hand it off to you to be part of the team.
Well, and I loved that. So, of course, immediately he wants to talk about it with people. In so many shows, it would have been Ted, this outsider, comes up with this brilliant idea that revolutionizes everything. And Beard is like, oh yeah, this has been done
50 years ago.
But to me, that really validated it, right? Like that he came up with an actual football thing, and it might be the right solution for his team, which Beard validates by saying, yes, we should definitely try this. And teachers, I don't know how often as a profession we end up, rediscovering something that Dewey or Piaget or Vygotsky did, right? And we kind of stumble across it in a new form. That just felt so much like real professional practice to me. And that, when you share that idea, somebody else is going to connect you with, oh yeah, here's where we've seen that before. Here's how other people have tried to do that. I just loved that as a professional moment.
So how do we help teachers to, again, make sure that what they're looking at, it doesn't need to be brand new, right? It just needs to be the right thing for your classroom, for your learners.
Yeah. Yeah, that's good.
Feels like we've talked a little bit about the vulnerability and the discourse, and we're already kind of going long. I wonder, do we want to jump to the social and emotional learning stuff? Because that feels like these last 3 episodes, there's lots there. And again, maybe not in the sense of here's what to do, but here's what it looks like when you don't have it.
Yeah, what's something that resonates with you for that?
Well, there were all sorts of examples of people being angry and not having a productive, positive way to deal with it. There's when the players find out that Nate was the one who tore the sign, and they go out on the field and they're just thugs. As a former coach, I understand what Beard and Roy were thinking. It certainly is a technique that coaches use, but they didn't give any supports for, okay, now that you're angry, how are we going to do this?
But I love Ted's response to it, right? He doesn't respond in kind, and they're mad at him then for not being mad at them.
I think that's the thing for teachers to remember sometimes. You and I've talked about this, and whenever I'm doing working with student teachers, it often comes up, is you don't have to react to everything that students do, especially when we're talking about adolescents, because that's exactly what they're trying to do. They're trying to gain a certain level of power by creating circumstances that force you to react.
I learned most of what I know about love and logic from you, that you don't have to have an original response. You don't have to make it your problem.
You don't even need to have an immediate response. And I think that that's some of what Ted's doing when he's not going to yell at them. He's going to let them work it out on their own. They're going to be harder on themselves than he could ever be.
Yeah.
It feels like one of the most socially, emotionally mature person in these 3 episodes is Henry. He bullies a kid. He recognizes what he did. He's self-aware. So if we're thinking about those castle frameworks that Mike Cackley introduced us to in the last episode. So he's self-aware. He recognizes he didn't do self-management. He didn't count to 10 and then do it again. He takes responsibility for it. He's accountable for it. And he does a rap, which I really wish we'd heard, right? I can't believe
Yeah.
But he's like the most emotionally, again, mature of everybody in these 3 episodes.
Yeah, that's fair. Because he's listening and processing and then reflecting. He's doing the things we want to come out of social emotional learning. So episode 6, the team doesn't split up and go their own ways. They stay together to resolve it. Ted does the individual work, as you were talking about. Rebecca opens herself up, right, and really takes a risk. Whereas she's somebody who likes to have things under tight control. That they're able to see new results.
Well, and Roy and Jamie and the bicycle scenes were fabulous in terms of stepping back to Roy being very vulnerable. He doesn't get there immediately, but because Jamie keeps pushing, he's curious about why he doesn't want to ride the bike, it comes out. He's honest about, he's vulnerable about that he can't, and then why he can't. And that he has been taking this anger, he says it, misplaced anger, and putting it on Jamie and owning that. And so yeah, I think that's a good point. He's having this payoff. And then that whole montage of him learning to ride the bike and Jamie helping out shows so much perseverance. That was one of the key things that Mike brought up in the episode as he was talking about the social emotional learning. It's part of the Castle framework. It's also part of when you look at the work the Dana Center did, and it connects social emotional learning to the mathematical practices. It's looking at perseverance. He doesn't give up. He throws the bike, he throws tantrums, all the sorts of things you would expect, but he does not give up.
Whereas, and at any point in my kind of worst teacher moments, he throws the bike, he gets angry, I could stop.
Right.
But Jamie's able to persevere, I think, through belief that he can do it. If you can dribble, you can ride a bike.
Oh yeah, that was it.
This episode, I mean, it just had everything for me, right? It had all this progress. Loved the relationship with the Rebecca and the mysterious boat captain, but then the Van Gogh Museum, which is just one of my favorite places in the world. And I'm pretty sure that passage that was said to Ted is from one of Vincent's letters to Theo. And that's one of the things that's most powerful in that museum is they have a lot of his text with his paintings. At least when I was there ages ago, it was arranged chronologically. So like every painting you saw was after the previous painting. And they had parts from his diaries, parts from people who knew him at that moment, the people he tried to trade that painting for food to, right? So it really captured a lot of that experience.
The piece that he wrote to Theo talks about he's going to continue to search for beauty. The docent who is next to Ted ends again with some of the same language that Henry used early on in this season. You've got to try. And Ted writes in his book, triangles, right? TRY. Try seems to be an important piece of what's going on. And that's exactly what we're trying to do in our classrooms and trying to get teachers to do is provide opportunities regardless of their mathematical demons, regardless of that baggage that they bring into the classroom. We can't ignore that baggage head on. We need to look it in the eyes and be able to acknowledge it and name it, but then be able to still try, find the beauty still beyond that. And that's the piece that is so hard for so many of our students and so hard for so many of our teachers, especially those teachers who, as Taylor talked about, have had a negative emotional relationship with mathematics.
With my son, we did a math and art lessons with my pre-service teachers, who then the next week did them with elementary kids. And it always amazes me because, right, math, and one of the things math and art have in common is people just saying, well, I just can't. But for some reason, you combine them, and the art aspect, the people who say they can't do math, that gives them freedom to try. And the math aspect, people who say they can't do art, well, there must be something logical to it. And it's just that permission to engage. It's sometimes just, it's a little bit of a change of setting that makes that happen.
Did your students have a better sense that what they were doing was math?
Well, I think they were surprised. I'm really glad they had a chance to do it with kids, because some of them saw their kids engaging in the math in a different way than they had before.
Oh, interesting.
And the week after, it was our last week, and so I was asking the kids, because our global purpose, right, is they know that we're coming in there because these people are trying to learn how to be teachers. And so I asked the kids to give them the teachers' feedback. With the third graders, several of them independently brought up the math and art project as a place where they really were thinking. And then the first graders, I asked them more kind of like, well, what was something where you really felt like you were learning? And several of them brought up the math and art project, which on one hand was just recent, right? First graders, right? But on the other hand, the things they said about, like ways to find 100, right? Were mathematical, so the teachers, I think, got to see some of that validated.
So this feels like it brings us full circle, right? This idea of play, inviting people into something that might be otherwise uncomfortable or frightening, and the role that play are giving a different perspective. And so that feels like it brings this full circle.
Well, and this is part of the value of discourse, right? Is what we've been talking through about these episodes made me kind of wonder, well, why did this episode have to take place in Amsterdam? That sense of kind of being in a different place, giving you permission. And Amsterdam is famous for so many different things, right? But that somehow having the break, relocating, that makes opportunity for re-engagement. I don't think this could have happened in Richmond.
I guess to wrap this up, we've been talking about traveling, getting out of this space, and most of our regular listeners will remember that I am 9 days from today leaving to go to Tanzania through the airport in Amsterdam. So this is going to be our last new podcast for a month.
Bon voyage. I hope you have an amazing trip. I know this is multiple times back for you, but I love the people there and the kids and the setting. Just everything about it is such an amazing experience.
It is an adventure, and it's a chance to get, like you were saying, get outside of our normal comfort zone and try out new things and learn new things as a result, and reflect on those things and hopefully bring them back.
Thank you, Dave, and have a good trip. Just a beautiful moment.
He's always been one of my favorite artists, and made me want to. I've the only time I've been in Amsterdam is in the airport, but it made me wonder on the way back from Tanzania if I could maybe get lost, so I missed my flight. So, anyways, probably shouldn't have said that out loud.
Well, at least there's no recorded evidence of it.
Yeah.